focus and excitement of this this International Art Weekend is, of course, the unveiling of Cristina Iglesias' work, which happened last night, the beautiful work Sea Cave Entrance. And Cristina and I will be having a conversation about her work in general, but also talking about that work. It's a new commission, and it has been installed in Hastings Gardens, where it's accessible for all to see. And it's a very important, that accessibility is a very important mission for MICAS, and the work will eventually be relocated in the MICAS Sculpture Garden in the San Salvatore counterguard in Floriana. I should introduce myself. My name is Edith Devaney. I have had an association over a few years now with MICAS, thanks to the chairman, Phyllis Muscat. And I am an art advisor to MICAS, and I head the creative committee, working very closely with Phyllis, with Georgina Portelli, and with Frances Sultana. And we're looking at all of the kind of artistic program and eventual exhibition program for the new building, which is much anticipated. But I want to just give a little bit of background on Cristina. I mean, many of you know her work well and have seen the beautiful work in Hastings Gardens. But just a little bit of background before we find out more about her practice. But she was born in San Sebastian in Spain. She lives and works in Madrid. And throughout her career, she has developed a completely unique sculptural vocabulary, which for me is very different to anything else that's happening. She builds very immersive and experiential environments that are so closely attuned to the architecture where they're placed, the environment where they're placed. There's references to the culture. Of they're very site specific in that way, to literature, and as in recognition of her achievement in 2020, she was awarded the Royal Academy Architecture Prize in London, and she's also working on a commission for to show her work in the courtyard at the Royal Academy next year, which we all anticipate with excitement. So I just wanted to note that behind us is a rolling programme of some of the projects that Cristina has done over the years. It's arranged in chronological order. You'll see the same works come up again and again, but it's really there to give a flavour of the extent of her practice. But just to start, Cristina, briefly, I'm always fascinated in how artists develop. And I wondered if you could start by giving us a sense of your entry into art, your early influences as a child, and then the training that you received, which kind of set you on your extraordinary path.
Well, hello to everybody. Well, actually, I had a bit of not chaotic, but it's I started, well, as you said, I was born in San Sebastian, where is a place that, apart from being beautiful as a landscape, it has a big tradition of sculpture. So I grew, let's say, understanding the abstraction of the language of sculpture, like Chillida or Oteiza. My formation was a bit eclectic, but always, now when I look back, I think that I was hesitating. I wanted to find a language that deal with architecture and literature and science, and at the end I made like a mix of everything. And yeah, that's more or less it. And I have to say that more than schools, I had encounters in my life. Like I remember in London there was an exhibition that was at the Hayward at that time that was called Piers and Ocean. Mm-hmm. And it's the first time that I saw land art, and I saw Smithson and Walter de Maria, and I saw also the Arte Povera, Mario Merz and all the others. So and Eva Hesse, that also had been like a and a moment in my formation, very crucial.
Yeah. How fascinating, that kind of mingling of sort of the scientific aspect of your education and the exposure to art, and just kind of on so much of what we're talking about is the subject of public art for a city that you grew up in. I don't know if anyone's been there and seen the Chilidas, which are, the city is so proud of the way that they installed these works by such an important artist, and that clearly had an effect on you and presumably many others. So it talks about the power of public art, doesn't it?
Yes, actually, yeah, I was always very attracted by nature and landscape, but also the urban side, which is because I feel that to work on those parameters is a responsibility that you have with the citizens, and I was attracted to it, and also today I'm deal with issues that we all are dealing with, and that are important, and I think art can bring light to perception and to look at things in a different way, and in that sense, well, I'm lucky that after so many years I was asked by the city to do a piece myself, and I chose the lighthouse on an island that is I'm very attracted to islands. I've done several projects also under the sea in the Cortez Sea in an island, Espiritu Santo, but here's the island of Santa Clara, and it's a lighthouse, and I have converted it into an experience that deals with the sea and the protection of the sea, and is very close to those other pieces of Chile.
Yeah, the sea combs.
Yes.
Yeah, on the edge of the ocean. So Cristina, just kind of referencing again the images that are scrolling behind us, which relate to a number of distinct and related concepts. And if I just read out all of these concepts, as you have identified them yourself: gates and passages, rooms and mazes, screens, suspended pavilions and corridors, light and shadow, the underground and phreatic zones, wells, public space, growth and entwined murals, imprint and reflections, wall construction, maquettes, and tres aqua, which we've already mentioned. I find these different chapters of your work completely fascinating, but what I wanted to know from you is how they operate for you, in how they interact with each other, and you might be working on different concepts at the same time, and some keep kind of recurring but developing. How do they interrelate across your practice?
I think everything is interrelated, and actually I follow in one hand my obsessions, and in the other the opportunities that I also have, because I've been lucky to do things first in the studio, like I did Refuge with alabaster, working with light at the very beginning, and the idea of a passage, and that something that is in between things, that deals with light, to suspend something. I mean, all those are parameters that exist in sculpture and in architecture, in art in general, because the illusion of painting has been always an inspiration and an obsession to me, that one could do. I could get close to that idea of that. Of course, in the Baroque, you find many examples of the use of that illusion of something being deeper than it is, and use mechanisms that you can play with to make that possible. So they asked me to do a door for the Prado Museum of the extension, and I asked the architect Rafael Moneo, can I think in a passage and not just a door, because that's passages for me were philosophically and poetically more what I wanted to do, these in-betweens, no? And it was, of course, a passage between the city and the temple of the imaginary. So that is the museum. And that way I develop a lot of things, like even if you go to the depth, when I did Deep Fountain in Antwerp many years ago, that was my first big, well, I did one before, but the first one that deal with water and this piazza, and I thought on not only creating a space, a place of a gathering place for people to meet, but also a place that could work with time. It's the first time that I very specifically work with the time and the depth and the illusion, in a sense of creating that to go down, to go deep down and the water disappearing and appearing again. I defended that was more spectacular than having a jet of water that in that fountain. So Deep Fountain again is a passage towards the depth, and of course with all the connotation it can have.
They're being encouraged to slightly adjust their mental state to go from one world into another. It's
Absolutely.
yeah, and then the idea of the water, which is that, and it's something that we see in Sea Cave, is entrance, is that you when the water drains away and then comes back again, it's almost like an egg timer. It's like the sand, the old-fashioned sand timers, that you're aware of the passing of time, because each revolution of that gives this idea of time ticking on.
Certainly, it's a measure of time, but also it's a way of thinking in the viewer, in the one that really gives time to it, but also that one that passes fast away in a city. Or here in Hastings is different because it's a plateau where people go to for the views, maybe not. But I've been always very interested in that the work actually the narrative of it deals with not only catching attention, but with the attention itself as an act of looking and spend time looking and maybe coming back to see if something repeats, if something you have seen happens again, or the surprise of something that you were not expecting, but it happens. And water also as a symbol of life that is under everything we construct and that we need so much, and we have to take care of it. All these are issues that are always there, and they don't appear in a very evident way, or there are subtle readings, but they are always there. And I'm very interested in the act of looking, and how much time we spend looking at things, and how fast, for example, you enter in a museum and you look at paintings and you go away. So with, for example, Deep Fountain, I thought on that. How long a person will be in the museum and come back and see the piece at a different state, no? And things like that also, of course, if you are in a like interventions, like you mentioned in the Bloomberg headquarters by Foster and Partners in London, the idea was also to create like instead of creating a security wall, the piece itself is like a moat around a castle, and so creates that distance, but at the same time creates a place to be, a place to encounter, or a place to be by yourself, alone, thinking and observing and getting into your thoughts, because all this is very psychological also, how you approach the pieces or something that appears in the city and stops the normal behavior or the speedness that we have in the traffic, moving from one place to the other. So that to slow down, no?
It's that's an extraordinary thing, actually. That whole idea of a sculptural, an artistic intervention, just slowing down normal life, and And then also that point that you were making about time and people's perception and how long they've got to interact with it. Something like the London project and the MICAS project will be the same. People will come and encounter it again and again. And that idea of the passage of time, of their perception of it, how that changes, that is clearly something that you give a lot of thought to. That it's repeat visits and it's building this relationship with the piece.
Yes, well, that's an intimate hope, you know. You don't know if people will go back to look at a piece or here in MICAS or others, you know. But yes, this idea of memory too, because I think we approach art that we are talking about everything, no, with our own memories and our own state of mind, and that changes.
We see psychologically, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's it's very phenomenological. I mean, it depends how you are at that moment and all your memories that you carry with. Like you look at here and you say, "Wow, yes, I understand that there is a reference to how the winds and the salt and the sun array the rocks." No, I've seen this somewhere, but at the same time, it constructs a new memory into your mind and your being, and you go away, and then maybe you look it from afar. You know, like the lighthouse in San Salvatore, or this piece here. One day you are on the other side, and maybe you look there and you see it in your mind, you know. I think all this construction of memory is something that art has that power. And again, as I was saying, referring more to public art, but also that responsibility in a way of that is loaded with that.
But I get the sense, Cristina, that you're very conscious of the responsibility of connecting with the location, with the public that are going to encounter your work, to make sure that all of those things are thought about, and you think very deeply about that encounter and the environment in which people are living and working and coming across the work once or on a very regular basis.
Yes, in one hand, because actually art has that capacity, as we were saying, no, of bringing light to certain issues, and also to move perceptions. I mean, to open the minds. In that sense, it has it's great that young people and I mean children, but also older people open themselves to new perceptions, and I think that is, in one hand, one of the issues that every artist has in mind or works with, and there is that intimate resonance that there is more, let's say, close to poetry, maybe we can say, in that sense that I said that is not a statement, it is something that is open to interpretation, and then of course there are issues that for example here that lead with landscape. I mean, and then is when I said, I mean, I have a responsibility of in creating landscape, because you have to work with what is there, what is the tradition, what is the layering, the strata, geologically, but also culturally, and all that is great. Also at the same time that to do a piece that you know that you can work on those levels of interpretation and perception again.
Yeah. And you mentioned poetry, and I mean, your works do have that deep poetic characteristic, and you spoke very eloquently about your various influences, but I just wanted to touch on literature as another key influence, and how that is interpreted into your work. I mean, in some ways it's quite literal in the wall construction pieces. It feels as if there's a kind of code, there's a language there. It's the same for some of your the canopy pieces, that there's text embedded in them in some way. But I just wondered how whether literature was something that kind of spread throughout your entire practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's in two or maybe more ways. One is the inspiration, no? That many times you read poetry or you read fiction and you get inspired
Mm-hmm.
by it. I always construct places, so at one point well, very early, because I was working with also creating, as we've said, passages or pavilions at the beginning on the ground, but then suspended, and when you have to, so I worked a lot with geologies, as we call
Mm-hmm.
these screens
Mm-hmm.
that has this in Spanish is the name celosia, that has to do, with the ideas of, I mean, it works in architecture as a screen that you can look through but can hide
Mm-hmm.
behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it has been a woman's device to look to the world and be hidden from the world, and sometimes not deliberately,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean the use of it is very interesting and is in every culture, especially the Arabic culture that is very much in my country
Mm-hmm.
influence, and also here. So when I was looking to the thinking and how to construct those screens, and that normally have a geometric drawing, and I studied the geometry of many of those drawings, I thought that text could be not only could be the structure
Mm-hmm.
of the piece, could be the structure of the sculpture. And that idea also was very interesting for me, because it's also like a hieroglyphic that, even if it's impossible somehow, I mean, it is possible because it's real. I mean, it has a narrative from beginning to end. So I chosen at the beginning texts like Impression d'Afrique for Raymond Roussel. I mean, a lot of French 19th century, end of the 19th century writings,
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's a total narrative excerpt, so that describes a place and place of imagination. So I chose always authors that were working on that level of the imagination. And when I started doing suspended constructions like corridors and canopies,
Mm-hmm.
and working with light and shadow, I started using more science fiction
Yeah.
authors
Yeah.
like Ballard and
Uh-huh.
others. And for me it was somehow an excuse, but that for me was interesting and made sense to make a drawing that in which it was not just a geometric drawing. It was a narrative that talks about a place constructing another place.
Right.
Mm.
That's fascinating, that whole idea of a narrative. And so that's something that's absorbed into many of your works. One of the things I'm always fascinated in with every artist, but an artist that works in the way that you do in particular, is what happens in the studio, that whole studio practice, because sculptors very different from painters, isn't it? The act of painting is a very solitary thing, and the idea that the artist has is embedded in the canvas, and no one else plays any part in it. But of course, being a sculptor, you have a team around you. You have to. The things that you do are incredibly elaborate. You need professionals who can help with the casting of the work, with the installation of the work. How does that initial concept that you have, I know you draw a lot and you rely on that to kind of develop ideas, but how do you nurture that very direct, personal initial idea into the final product. I mean, I have to say, I think you do it incredibly successfully because it feels very personal to you, and very true to the way that you think. But how do you guide that process through? I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, well, as you said, I do different type of works, not only the monumental and public works, but also smaller ones that are, because always around any work that I do, there are others that are my way of studying the space, the sculpture, the elements. For example, when I'm thinking about detail and I do a mural, like a wall piece that is, I call them entwined growth, that I presented in New York last time. I did a show there with Marian Goodman, but also have done in some of the shows you mentioned. Those have a different pace of how I make it. We start with the drawing, but then I cast different elements in aluminum and glass, and then there is a moment of composition of it all. So all this happens in one hand in my most intimate studios. I have like different sites in my studio, one that is more intimate and where I'm alone. Also when I'm traveling, I draw a lot. I also do models with wax and clay,
Right.
and I do photos of my models. And after those photos, I work a lot, painting on paper on them, or silk screening on copper that I've used since the beginning of because of the qualities of the copper being also. I worked a lot with mirrors also. Mirrors with materials that are reflective. And so that happens in one side of the studio. Of course, I do doing this sculpture, I need help because it's heavy and a lot of things happen. And then I have an extension of my studio that is the foundry, that I don't work in the classical way of doing a piece and having a mold and doing multiples of it, or being able to do, even if you don't do many. I do parts, so is a real extension. I have to be there very often. I have a team there that works with me nearly all the time, continuously. And because I do, like this piece here was done, first I came and I embedded myself with the site, with the possibilities of what could I talk here. This idea of the cave that has been so also was in my pieces that talk about refuge, because a cave is something that is made by nature, is constructed by nature, and can be inhabited, but also has all the mysterious side of the connections with, in this case, with the sea maybe, or with other caves that are inside, etc. So thinking on that, I did surfaces, textures that I do in bronze, first in wax, then in bronze, and then we modulate them in bronze, so heating the parts and doing so. It's not a cast of a rock, it's a rock that is modulated with imprints. That is something that also I love, the imprints of nature, also in the vegetation.
So that's a pretty elaborate process.
It's
and
very
quite
elaborate.
Unusual.
Yeah. Yes, and so then it's a moment of composition. So this piece cannot exceed. You can make a copy because there is no mold.
Yeah.
It's made with parts that in a way that is unique, and I like that because connecting with the idea of the studio. That's part of my studio, or the way I work in the studio. But of course, there are many other issues. I work with architects, so I have a part of the studio that I have an architect that works with me, Mai, and we have to study the sites and the proportions and the a lot of other things that is maybe that we also use computers, etc. But I'm always very attached to drawing, as you said, and to collage. I do a lot of collages.
Yeah, but I mean, what you're describing is an extraordinary journey through the development process, where it starts with the drawing, but you're really involved in absolutely every stage. And this final stage that you describe with the bronze is kind of quite extraordinary. But obviously, you're overseeing the whole thing, and each work is unique, and that sense of the collaboration seems to come in more when you are gathering information about the site. And I know that's something that you did here in Malta, and worked very closely with Georgina and the team here to get a deeper understanding of the site, the fauna, the whole landscape, everything. And the kind of the extraordinary history of Malta too, which
again going to the idea of refuge, because Malta has been always also a refuge in many ways, for the sailors, the Mediterranean.
Yes, I know, and its geographical position makes it kind of pretty unique, and that has very much played a part in its history. And that it's a key characteristic of your work, the extent to which it's so site specific. It engages so well and deeply and subtly. It's that kind of very, very subtle engagement with the place, and it's not just the kind of in the case of the MICAS piece, it's not just the history, but it's the contemporary culture as well, and kind of understanding how people will absorb the work into their life.
Absolutely, and again we come to this idea, if one can do a piece that opens your mind, that opens to other places or to imagination. That's but it is site specific, but it's more, I always say, site sensitive, because it can exist there, but in this case we are going to take it to MICAS, to the gardens. We have already chosen a place, and I think it will work fantastically there too. I mean, even we want to make it even better.
Yes.
And I like that, as also as an artist and as a sculptor, working with space, and I many times it happens with my work that people say, "Oh, you did it just for here." But I do shows in museums, and pieces live in houses too, and they can live, but maybe they need a corner, or they need to be deep, or they need to be, the coordinates are precisely and very sensitive to the space they can occupy, and then you can find, of course, other places with that corner or whatever.
Yeah. No, that is that's completely fascinating about this idea of the work finding its place, being specifically made for a place, but then the smaller pieces finding a place that they're comfortable in.
Absolutely.
That they and that kind of leads me to I wanted to read a very short quote by a writer, Beatrice Colomina, who wrote in 2015 about your work. She writes beautifully about your work. And she says, "What is so remarkable about Cristina Iglesias' interventions is they do not appear to be interventions, as if the ultra-technological and geometrically abstract modernity of the buildings contain within it a deeper, damp, organic layer that you uncover and reveal." And I thought that was such a great description of your work, and there is a sensitivity in all your work, but it is particularly keenly seen in the commissioned works, where you have shown great sensitivity and respect. And just going back then to that notion of that integration, looking back at the past of the locality, creating that sense of peeling away the layers, which you've already done, and revealing what lies beneath. What we've touched on it already, but can you speak a little bit more about the challenges of this passing of time? And I'm thinking particularly of the MICAS work, kind of, that idea of going down, looking at what's underneath, revealing that, thinking about what was there in the past. that idea that the passing of time, is that something that runs across all of your pieces?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, but I mean, because you need time to walk from one. It happens with architecture. It happens with space, no. Beatriz Colomina was referring to Toledo, where there are three sides, and you have to walk from one side to the other, and then the memory and the strata of the city, again, geologically, culturally, the three different cultures that could live together at the same time. All these was like a building thing. That time, the time and the history was there, but also the time you take physically to go from one place to the other, and that time that you take with you, with your memories of not only what you know of history, but also of what you just have seen, no? And then you go to the other side, and it has something that deals with it. It reminds you of what you have seen, but it's not exactly the same. I think water, I use water also as a communicator, as an idea of communication. And actually in Toledo, the three cultures, the Islamic, Christian and Jewish, they were sharing baths, they were sharing water, they were, and I took that as a symbol, as a material that I could work with, the idea of time. I think here a certain idea of time happens also with the sound of the water, which is something that, for example, also in the Arab gardens has been used very much, which is somehow it can take you to no time, to a moment of suspension in time, but creating a sequence with the water, a sequence in which the way the water moves changes, and of course with the weather conditions, when it's outdoors, it changes again, and you cannot control, and all those elements. Talk about time, and the time of looking, the time of waiting, the time of the repetition, the time of coming back. It's there, and again, this time that is mental, that takes you to space, is time and space.
Yeah. And the other word that you used a couple of times is the narrative, and this idea of time and the narrative being linked in some way. The passage from the three sites in Tres Aguas becomes a kind of narrative, because you're creating your own story and your own sense of sensations and memories as you go through each site, and that becomes a kind of cumulative thing. I want to quote someone else now. So Norman Foster, you've worked with, Lord Foster, and the great architect, and you've worked closely with him. You've spoken to him a lot about your work. You're very familiar with his architecture. He's very familiar with your work. I love that sort of relationships that you build in that way, that comes out is developed and very clear in the work that you do together. But he made this very important statement, I thought, where he said that the quality of life in the city is directly related to the quality of its public space. And I know that you share this view, and it's certainly very much articulated in your work and its generosity. It reveals a sensitivity to people in the situation that where they encounter the work, and it's a marked characteristic. But in terms of the history of sculpture, it seems to me as if your work is very sort of anti-monumental, and I'm thinking of those pieces of sculpture that we've all grown up with, which are sort of very dominant, that demand attention. Yours are very different. They demand just as much attention, but in a much quieter way, and they've got that. It draws you in a very contemplative space rather than dominating. Do you see your work as anti-monumental, despite its often extraordinary scale and ambition? It's no reflection on that, because I think that the scale and ambition are most certainly there. And do you see yourself as avoiding that kind of, that distinct monumental, often insensitive in its terms of placing, And are you interested in kind of slowing down the public's engagement so it's not this kind of immediate hit of just seeing something big, but it's a very different encounter?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, monuments, they had their reason to be, and there are reasons to turn down monuments. Of course, that's history and the relation with history. But yeah, I'm interested in in creating places, as I was saying. And when we are talking of a urban place, a urban situation, you can create places that are gathering place where people, like in the city, what I did with Norman on that occasion with the Bloomberg building it was so dry. I mean, people could not have a place to have a sandwich, and then more than that, to encounter, to be with people that you know and to meet people that you don't know. And I think that's important in the cities of today more than before, because we have lost, everything goes so fast, as I was saying before. So to slow down and to create places where you can meet a stranger and maybe become friends, or spaces that somehow offer a certain security, in the sense of being, in a way, a place where you can go, or children can play, or is all these issues in a city should be, they are there. Is something that the architects and the urban planners have to work with, and I love to, as an artist, to contribute to this dialogue and this thinking, to give solutions, or to offer plateaus where these things can happen, more than do something to honor brave whoever,
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Cristina. That's wonderful, and I'm going to have to leave it there. I have got a few more questions, but we could talk all day. But I do want to give everyone else an opportunity to ask some questions to Cristina. And I just wondered, Georgina, can I start with you, because I know that you will have a fantastic, or several questions, but because you've worked very closely with Cristina in installing the work and thinking about the context, so it'd be wonderful if you could kick us off.
Well, I think she's partly answered one of my questions with regards to, you preceded me there with monuments. And the notion of public art, because I think Christina's a wonderful exponent of public art, and the conversations in cities with what public art, the functions of public art. So I'm very pleased that you've touched upon this. With regards to the piece. To the Hastings Garden piece, of course, I think in our development, I think Christina's very, very sensitive engagement with place has put a challenge has thrown the gauntlet, I think, and should perturb the system in terms of how we engage. I mean, this is more of a statement on my part rather than. I think there's an exuberance there in how this has developed. I'm going to leave it there, I think.
Cristina, do you have any response to?
Well, no, yes. I mean, it's not a question. It's it's a complicity, and I love it, and I love to have had this opportunity. Because always when an artist is given an opportunity to deal with issues that are so important as doing a public piece is, and as we said, to study the situation, to create landscape, or to recuperate landscape, which is a very interesting, because it also took us to study the plants and this and that. But also this, to do a public piece is always, as I said before, a responsibility, but is a very interesting field that you can, and you know that you have to work on it because it's something that is open, and now let's see what people, how they make it theirs, no? Because it belongs to the people here.
Thank you. Any other questions? We've got time for a few more. Francis.
What I wanted to say was, Cristina, as you've come to Malta now a few times, do you think Malta will have a lasting effect on you as a place of inspiration for your work going forward?
Totally. I mean, I'm on so many levels. I mean, it's also, as I said, I'm so attracted to the insularity. I mean, the island as a concept and as a reality. And what I need to explore more Malta and the Maltese people, because I've made friends here. No, but of course, and I'm very curious also with the project of interested in the project of MICAS, because it will establish ground to for other artists from here and internationally to create that dialogue and that necessity of thinking together on issues that we all are preoccupied, or things that will surprise us, because would be artists coming with ideas that we haven't thought before, and this is so important for a society to grow and to live with your time and with your history. And I'm very, very interested, and I'm sure I will come back.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great, thank you. Do you just want to wait for the microphone so we can all hear you?
I was wondering how you scaled up your practice from when you started when you were younger as a student, maybe working in a studio, and how did you go on to working on these large-scale projects? Like, what was the kind of route that you took to actually start scaling up your practice, working as having a large studio with a foundry in it, and working on these large-scale pieces all over Europe? Like, what was your path from, I don't know whether you went to college and then grew your practice after that?
You mean, I don't know if I understood well, so how what is the question?
Like, how did you start from working as an artist maybe on your own to growing your practice, working on as a large scale kind of international based sculptor?
Again, I have to come to the idea of opportunities. I think it's so important to be open, and sometimes the opportunity is very small. I mean, it's not something that because it's true that you have to gain credit as with the others. That they at the beginning, I remember that I was ambitious, and I proposed projects that I realized the others. I mean, the commissioners, they would say, "But are you able to do that? I mean, how can you do that? Are you gonna do?" Coming from the river to the upper part, and what the city will say, and of course it's like a labor of convincing the others that you are able to do it, that you can form a team to do it. And I don't have a big team. At one point I had it a bit bigger, and then now it's more diverse, as I was saying, that the foundry is one part of the studio, but I'm not responsible for everything they do, because otherwise you grow big and it's so I always try to have that to keep the relation with my inner side and my small studio and being alone. But I'm able to do big things because I love also to collaborate, and in this process I have, and these opportunities, through these opportunities I have come to collaborate with engineers, structural engineers, environmental engineers, hydraulic engineers, architects, and the dialogue is so rich, and it opens relations and possibilities of working together. So I think I would say that when you start the best is to of course, if you to believe in yourself is always difficult. I many times, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it, but you have to really believe, and then to be brave, actually, to go for it, I think.
Yes, that bravery is very clear in your work, and at the early stages, I guess that ambition was the thing that just kind of pushed you forward. And
Suppose.
Any other questions? There's one here. Where's the mic? Here we are. One question, just this gentleman here.
Thank you. So you mentioned you do kind of a lot of research before you create a piece. Could you kind of expand a little bit on that and perhaps tell us a little bit more about your process? Do you kind of work off of a concept and then that guides the aesthetic of how you develop a piece, or is it the aesthetic which comes first? What's your process like, and what exactly does your process of research look like?
Yes, well, to answer to that, I have to tell you that I feel all my work, but sometimes it's specific works that are more related to each other. So my investigation, as I said before, of what a cave can be or can symbolize, or the relation with the sea, that I've done projects even at the bottom of the sea in Mexico, with collaborating with marine biologists, and it took me to an investigation, also an interest, also that even if you do a little hole, organisms grow there, and so we were talking about creating a places that can be inhabited by humans, but also by other species, and so the investigation goes on many levels. That is not only this for Malta, is not only Malta, is all these connections that I've been investigating and discussing with people that are in those fields. So it's not just me alone saying, well, I want to do a beautiful piece that looks deep, though that's very difficult to do. But I have discussed also, and when I say collaborate, I did, for example, in Baja California with the marine biologists. My project was part of a very wide project and serious project that are many people involved to create marine refuge in this. The state is involved, and there are precise activists that are doing the real work, and I participated with them as creating a symbol for that. And when I came here, I thought, well, it's an island, the history of this country that is so fascinating through history and related. Also now, thinking in terms of Europe, I was also very interested in that Malta is also part of Europe and has played a role. So that, as I was saying before, as a refuge, as a place that is. This is sea so important, and how to arrive to it, how you approach to that, and how important it is to preserve also what we have, in terms, as I'm saying, with the marine bio, to preserve the sea, to preserve the coasts. I'm very interested, and I've been in San Sebastian also working with geologists that are experts, and in preservation of the coasts. That the coast, when we were talking about strata, the strata talks about the life of our planet, and we have to take care of it. And then, so everything is interconnected. So I wouldn't tell you. Of course, we have also even been. I was asking, to the team, what are the plans that used to be here when Hastings is a British garden, and I wanted to that. Parcel that I had to remove the perimeter to make it more. I mean, the idea of wideness is also an idea that doesn't exist anymore. We know that, we have been discussing about it, and it's something that I'm very aware that is a fiction, So, but I play with that, I play with, because I think to talk about it, to create fictions that cling in issues that we can maybe include in our discourse and in our conversation is worth.
Thank you very much. I don't think we've got any time for any other questions, so it just leaves me to thank everyone, to firstly thank the board and the staff of MICAS for making this event possible and for this wonderful acquisition and installation of Cristina's brilliant sea cave entrance possible, and to Musa for generously hosting this event, and above all to Cristina for bringing to MICAS to Malta your wonderful sculpture, which will just continue to delight everyone here for many decades to come, and for this conversation. So thank you, Cristina.
Thanks to you. Thanks to you.